Everybody, welcome to Wednesday, second day of work this week. I appreciate everybody that got their stuff turned in yesterday. Now, today's assignment, we are going to continue to learn about medieval Africa, but we're going to focus on the geography. So, we're going to start talking about some of the major locations, the weather, what it looks like. That way, we can get an idea of how that could influence or impact how everybody's lives were. We've kind of seen in the past, we've looked at some of these places like Mesopotamia and how they were, super wealthy because of all of the resources, the water, the farmland they had. We've looked at places like Japan where being on a tiny island without a lot of space made land very valuable. So now we're going to look at how being in Saharan Africa could have affected the people that started civilizations there. So today's objectives, it says I can describe how Africa's geography impacted people's lives there, and I can analyze and write about my own observations. So today's steps over on the right here, I think the easiest thing to do is going to be to try and split screen this video with Google Slides because you are going to be filling out everything out in a Google slide. If you watch this video, you're going to get the answers to all of the slides, so all of the information you need. I'm either going to actually say it in this video or I'm going to show you where you can find the answer. You're going to have a passage to read. It's pretty short, but it talks about the geography of Africa and, what parts of it are important to make note of. And you're going to have to write me a paragraph talking about how that geography, what you read about in that passage, how that actually impacted the lives of, the native Africans, the people that were starting these early civilizations during the medieval period. So your assignment, as you've already found, is in Google Classroom. It's right here titled African Geography. And those same steps are listed right here. And there's going to be a Google slide attached. And it says Africa Geography Student Slides. And that's going to be where you're filling everything in. So you're going to want to make a copy of that to go over and fill out while you are listening to what I'm presenting here. And once again, if you are having any issue with Google Classroom or specifically Google Slides is not working for you, please email me. Let me know that Google Slides is not working correctly for you. I will send you a PDF of the slides so you still have something to look at and fill out and turn in. I don't want anyone to feel like they can't get their work done because technology is not agreeing with them. So, your slide is going to start with a page like this, big blank map. We've seen this before. We're familiar with these blank maps. I'm not going to attach the other set of slides to your Google Classroom, though. I'm going to show them in this video, and if you are looking for the answers for those slides, you're going to have to watch this video to find everything. I just want to make sure that people are paying attention to the instructions, so I'm going to hide them in here. You're going to be able to find them. It's pretty easy. So I'm actually going to make this screen a little bit smaller because I have a copy of the slides I would have presented if I was teaching this during class right here. So I am going to put this in present mode. And the first thing we're going to do is we are going to fill out this slide right here. So you see there's a 1, 2, 3, 4. Each of these has a text box that you can fill in. And what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to label whatever item or whatever name goes in that part of the map. And pay attention to where the arrows are pointing. Sometimes they're pointing at the blue line. Sometimes they're pointing in the green spaces. Sometimes they're pointing in the orange or yellow section. So I'll do my best to explain it, but just make sure you pay attention to where you're writing things. So once we get past this slide, I will come back and we'll fill out the next one here. So make this little dude smaller. Go to present mode. So, what we're going to be talking about today, once again, is the continent of Africa. And specifically, we're going to be talking about, how does geography change or affect how we live our lives? Things like the weather, the terrain, what kinds of resources are there, what kinds of food, all of that stuff. Now, today, we're specifically going to be talking about Africa. Now, we've already talked a little bit about Africa because remember we talked about the ancient civilization of Egypt. But where Egypt was this little tiny corner right here, we're going to be talking about medieval Africa and the kingdoms of medieval Africa, which actually take up most of this side of the continent instead. So we're going to be talking a lot about Western Africa for this unit. Now, we talked about this a little bit on your last assignment, but this is a big part I want to discuss is we've looked at a lot of these pictures of the continents at night. There's the continent of Africa right here, and above it we have Europe. To the right we have the Middle East of Asia. And what we're looking at here specifically is we're looking at the light pollution. We're looking at where there is a higher concentration of lights and electricity because that lets us know where there are more people living. So we have 3 different clusters in the African continent where there is the most people. So in the top we have this circle where you can see this is where Egypt is and the Nile River. Down a little bit lower we have Western Africa on the coast, the border of the Atlantic Ocean. And then we have one more concentration way down here at the very southern tip of Africa. So that's where the most people live. We have some people around the coast here. We have some people on the coast here. We have a lot of lights across the top. But the biggest populations will be in those 3 spots. And it's really dark through here in the middle, and we're going to talk about why that is as we keep going through here. So, here's a blank map. This is where you're going to start finding things to fill in on your map. So that first slide that you need to fill in, here's where you're going to start to find the answers to that. So out of all of these major locations that we need to know, the first one we're going to talk about is the Atlas Mountains. So at the very top of the African continent, the farthest north, we have a mountain chain. And that is important because mountain chains are not usually great for things like farming. They're usually not good for crops. But mountain chains, what there usually is access to minerals and resources. So a lot of metals, a lot of spices, things that go on foods, could be mined out of mountainous regions. So one thing that we're going to learn a lot about Africa is that having access to those mountain chains actually gives them a lot of resources that they can sell for money. That makes them pretty rich, these medieval kingdoms in Africa. Next one we're going to look at, something we should have all heard of in the past. This big area outlined in orange is the Sahara Desert, one of the biggest deserts in the world, and it covers most of northern Africa. You can see the brown color, the sandy color going across almost from one coast to the next of the northern part here, and that, once again, is the Sahara Desert. Now, we have 2 major rivers that we're looking at in northern Africa here. We have the Niger River right here, which is on the west side. And to the right, we have, I'm going to skip a little bit, the Nile River. So we've heard of the Nile, that's the area that goes near ancient Egypt. But we also have the Niger River as a major area where early civilizations started. Now, right below the Sahara Desert is going to be this area. We learned the word on Monday, but it's actually, one more time, the Sahel, this area right here. And the Sahel is semi-arid. That means that it has plants, it has a couple trees. There is more rain than if it was the desert, but it's not quite humid enough. It's not quite damp enough for there to be whole entire forests. So the Sahel is actually the area where a lot of people in these early civilizations started, particularly over here by the Niger River, because the climate was, just too right. It was not too arid, not too desert, and it was not, rainforests yet. Now, way over here, we have another mountain chain, the Ethiopian Highlands. And this is a really pretty area. There's huge mountains and cliffs, but they're all covered in rainforest. So the Ethiopian Highlands is something you're going to have to record. And once again, we had mentioned the Nile River. Now, below the Sahel is what's called the Congo Basin. And the Congo Basin is a huge, very dense rainforest. So covered in trees and plants. So thick the forest is that it's almost difficult for people to live in. Kind of for the opposite reason that the desert is difficult to live in. It's dry. There's no plant life. There's no food up here. There's so many plants and so many trees that it's hard to find land to farm on down here. That's why we talked about the Sahel being so nice, because it's a mix between these two. Now, at the very bottom, below the rainforest, we have the Kalahari Desert. So the very top of Africa is a desert. The very bottom is a desert. It's not quite as bad as the Sahara there. You can see in the picture there's actually more green than at the very top, but it is still a desert. It is still difficult living conditions in that part of the continent. To the left of the African continent, we have the Atlantic Ocean. To the right, we have the Indian Ocean. That's because the country of India is not on the map, but it's right about right here where it gets cut off. We have one of the largest freshwater lakes in the world, Lake Victoria, which is actually the start of the Nile River. Nile River goes from Lake Victoria all the way through here. We have the savanna, an area with lots of grass, not very many trees, but big open fields between the Niger River and the Nile River. The Red Sea up here in between the Sahara Desert and Saudi Arabia. At the very top, we have the Mediterranean Sea. That means right on the other half of this is countries you learned about last year, like Rome and Greece. Or not countries, empires you learned about last year. And that will do it for your map. So here's a picture of how Africa is organized country-wise. There's a lot of really big countries up here towards the Sahara Desert because, you have to have a lot of land for people to live on if it's so difficult to find resources. And look, as you get toward that rainforest, it gets smaller and smaller because you don't have to spread out as much when you have more access to stuff. So looking at some images, we've seen this image before. This is the Nile River. You can see that even though it is in northern Africa, it is not a desert. It's full of plant life. It has trees in the back. At the very top of the image below the sun, you can see the mountain chains and whatnot. And at the bottom, you see access to the river. We have the Red Sea, which has one of the highest salt contents for any body of water in the world. And because of that, there's not very much access. Plants don't really survive off of heavy salt water like that. So you can see that it's actually very rocky and arid along the edge there. We have the Sahara Desert in the top of Africa. We talked about how there's very little plant life. It's very flat except for, rock formations and stones in the background. We have those Atlas Mountains at the very top. That's where a lot of minerals and gold could be found. That's how a lot of these empires made their money, was by mining in these mountains at the top. We have the Ethiopian highlands. We talked about how the Ethiopian highlands were a very mountainous region, but those mountains are covered in forests and jungles. So see all the trees coming across both at the top and the bottom. And to the right, you can actually even see where they have cleared a bunch of those trees for farmland. So this is one of the areas where people and civilizations were able to grow a lot of crops and food. I have one more picture of the Ethiopian highlands. Different perspective, but still a lot of the same stuff. And then here we have that giant lake I talked about, Lake Victoria, which is now in the country of Uganda. But for a continent where we discuss, or we've talked about how, arid and covered in desert it is, it always was surprising to me when I thought of the fact that it also had one of the biggest lakes in the world. That's a huge body of water. We have the Niger River right here. Remember, that was on the western side of Africa. We've got some folks that are in there traveling by boat. One of the main things we learned of, why do people live near rivers? It was because in ancient times it was an easy way for transporting things. We have those grasslands. We talked about miles and miles and miles of just flat grassland with not very many trees. You can see some bushes in the background there, but there are no forests. You can see way, way in the distance because of how short all the plant life is. Here's another picture of those grasslands. We have a little bit of an outcropping of trees, but once again, it's, somewhere between like 5 to 10 trees grouped together. It's not an entire forest. And we have, at the bottom of Africa, we have the Kalahari Desert. Now, we talked about how the Kalahari Desert was not as bad, as arid as the Sahara Desert was. And the Kalahari Desert, right here, we can see 4 different pictures. And they all look very different from each other. I mean, some areas have trees and sand. Some area has no trees, but it has a lot of plant life or grasses and bushes. And some areas almost look like the savannah or the Sahel, to the point where you probably could go there and farm or grow crops. And once again, this is the Kalahari Desert at the very bottom of the African continent. Now, now that we're back, we should have, based off of what we just looked at there, this entire page filled out. All 14 of these different locations should be labeled now. The very next slide number 2 on your Google slides, it says, make a prediction. So this is a satellite photo of Africa. And we can't see up close, but based on what we can see, we can look at we can look at the areas that probably have access to water, the areas that don't have access to water. We can see the areas with more plant life. We can see the areas with less plant life. We can see what looks rocky or what looks flat. So what you need to do is it says, describe the terrain, that means the landscape of Africa, in 5 words. So you need to pick 5 words that could describe what you think this area looks like. And we've used a lot of those words already, but whatever you're comfortable with saying or whatever you think fits best, you need to pick 5 words. And now number 2 says make 2 predictions detailing how the terrain would have affected people's lives. So if you said one of your words was desert, how could the desert affect how people's lives were? If one of the words you used was rainforests or forests or jungles, how could having all those jungles affect how their lives were? So you need to make 2 guesses, and they don't have to be a paragraph. They don't even have to be complete sentences. But I just want you to make a prediction about, if you lived in the desert, how do you think that would affect your life? How would that affect how you grew up or what you had to do to survive. Now, next one, pretty easy. It's just a review of that first slide. So we have all of those locations over here and they are all labeled. You need to take each box, drag it to wherever it belongs so that it matches all the locations we just saw in the video. Okay, so this is the part where it's going to get a little bit more difficult than just, matching things. You're going to have to read a little bit about what geography or the geography was like in Africa, and then you're going to have to write me a paragraph. So it says right here, go to My Maps, and there's a link in blue. And it says that we are going to have to click the green Africa layer of the map, and we're going to have to read the description that pops up. So if I click this blue link, it tells me to go there, and I click it. Large awkward space while we're waiting for it to load, and it says click the green Africa layer. So see how the continent of Africa is outlined in green. If we click it, or if you just push the screen right here, a reading is going to pop up. And it says, the region known as West Africa takes up part of the northwestern portion of the African continent. In the north, West Africa is bordered by the Sahara Desert. In the south, it is bordered by both the Atlantic Ocean and a forest region. So they're talking about this chunk, Western Africa, right here. Let's zoom in. So it said, to the north, it is bordered by the Sahara Desert. To the south, it is bordered by the Atlantic Ocean and the jungle. The Atlantic Ocean provides the western border, and the mountainous region of modern-day Cameroon, so these mountains over here, act as, Cameroon acts as the eastern border. The West African region is home to 4 separate vegetation zones. That means there's 4 different climates just in this little part of Africa right here. A vegetation zone is an area characterized by the climate, the physical terrain, the type of soil they have. And West Africa's vegetation includes, there's forests, there's savanna, there's desert, and there's a semi-desert. So it's kind of a cross between a grassland and a desert. The Sahara is an inhospitable environment. That means that you can't just live there easily. It is an inhospitable environment with high daytime temperatures, low nighttime temperatures, rocky soil, and very little rainfall or vegetation. So it's really hot in the daytime. It's really cold at night. There's no water. There's no plants. Sounds rough. Despite the challenging terrain, the Sahara is the home to valuable natural resources, including salt, gold, and copper mines. So, like we said at the beginning of the video, even though there's no access to plant life here, that means that there are probably other resources in the soil. And the empires, the civilizations in Western Africa, they were actually very wealthy because they had access to all these things like gold and copper and salt, things they could sell to other parts of the world like the Middle East or Europe. So they could mine all of these resources out. They could take them to the coast and they could send them away on ships to all of these different parts of the world. Now, the Sahel, right here, or West Africa's semi-desert vegetation zone, has more rainfall than the Sahara, which allows for the growth of grasses and small plants and bushes. The savanna has more annual rainfall than the Sahel. As a result, there's tall grasses and trees here. Thanks to the Niger River and the savanna's rainy season, inhabitants of West Africa were able to grow crops like sorghum, rice, and millet, so different grains to make things like bread. And they were able to raise livestock such as camels, goats, and cattle. In addition to providing fertile soil for farming, the Niger River offers regional transportation for trade, so they could also travel by boat. Other regional natural resources included yams, oil palms, and iron ore. So some more things they were able to make. Yams, that's a type of food. A lot of the times we eat it here for like Thanksgiving. Oil palms, so that's, once again, it's another plant similar to like a palm tree leaf that produces an oily substance. And lastly, iron, like the metal. So that's our entire description here. That was the whole reading. And what we need to do with that is, back on our original Google slide, the last page says that you need to use the word bank to write me a 3 to 5 sentence paragraph. And the question that you need to answer, it says, in what ways did geography shape the lives of ancient Africans? So during the medieval period, I want you to think there's no electricity, there's no cars, there's no running water, there's no grocery stores. You have to farm for a living, or you have to mine, get resources out of the ground. Some of you might be able to trade that stuff away or sell it. You're either walking or traveling by camel if you need to go somewhere. In what ways do you think that this geography, the weather, the terrain could have affected people's lives? And I want you to make sure you use the following words in your 3 to 5 sentences. You need to mention the Sahara and the Sahel. So talk about maybe what it looked like in each of those places. You need to mention that there were rainforests. You need to mention what kind of resources they had. You need to mention the savanna, those grasslands. And you should probably mention that there was gold, because that is one of the things that will make medieval Africa, specifically Western Africa, so popular with the rest of the world, is they had a lot of gold and it made them very rich. So with that in mind, I would like you to type your 3 to 5 sentences right here. This is due on Wednesday by 3 p.m. Now, I am going to be available today at 10 a.m., noon, and 2 p.m. to answer questions on Google Meet. Now, besides Google Meet, if you have any questions, please send me an email. If you are working on this on Wednesday, it is due by 3 p.m. But if you have any questions, just because I don't have Google Meet scheduled doesn't mean you can't get a hold of me. Send me an email if you want to talk. Ask if we can set up a video chat. I am here to help. I am always here to direct you with whatever you need. And once again, if something's not working, please, please, please let me know so that I can help you. With that in mind, you should be able to get your work done. That should be all the tools you need. Please remember to attach your work to this Google Classroom assignment and submit. That is both how I'm going to take attendance for Wednesday, Thursday, and it's how I am going to be able to put a grade in for you, because I check Google Classroom to see who's turned in their work. Just a friendly heads up to make sure that you are getting this done on time. I am going to have part of my assignment on Friday be a kind of a little pop quiz where you're going to be asked to tell me different locations on the African continent. It's not going to be super difficult, but you might want to make sure that you get this done and that you are studying it on and off, because in a couple days, I'm going to be asking you again what some of those locations are. So that's all I've got for you today. Best of luck. If you need anything, please let me know. Have a great day.